Sunday, January 22nd, 1989. This is the Shreveport-Bossier Times, the Times from Shreveport-Bossier. Hunter discovers body. Natchitoches. Decomposed body was found in a creek bed Saturday afternoon about 5 miles south of Natchitoches. And the news article talks directly about my father. And I do remember him specifically telling me that he left me out of the article, but the fact of the matter is that that we would not have found this if it wasn't for me being a kid and not listening to what my dad told me to do, what he asked me not to do. And yeah, when I was 7 years old, I found a dead body. Yeah, so this was probably the first time or one of the first times that I had gone hunting with my dad. And I know, obviously from the article, I know we weren't very far out of town. And we turned on a dirt road, and it had just been raining. It was muddy. It was wet. There were mud holes. There was still water on the ground. And I remember it was overcast. It was pretty cool. It was a cooler day. I remember wearing a coat. And he was supposedly was rabbit hunting is the reason he went out there. I always remembered him saying it was deer. But the newspaper article says rabbit. And he did have two different guns with him. I think he had a shotgun and he had some type of a rifle. And he's playing with the gun. He's setting a scope on it, or he put a target on a tree and maybe made a couple of test shots, sighting in a scope. And I'm on the opposite side of the road along the tree line, playing with sticks, picking up pine cones. And I ended up crossing the road, going over to the right-hand side of the road, and there is this big culvert. And I immediately remember him telling me not to go over there, like stay away from, you'll fall in the creek or whatever. And I ended up walking away, and I came back a second time, and I'm looking over, trying to be a kid, curious. And there's a foot. It's like a skeleton foot. It's very disgusting. It's in various stages of decomposition, and I tell my dad, I'm like, hey, there's a foot. And obviously he's like, you're being a kid, go kick rocks, go play somewhere else. And I ended up leaving and thinking not a lot of it, but I made my way back there again a third time, and this time I got down on my stomach and pulled myself over the edge, and that point there's a foot and there's a leg attached to it, and I'm like, hey Dad, there's not only just a foot, but there's literally a leg attached to this. Something's down there. And at that point he was like, okay, this kid's obviously not being, not being that much of a prankster or something. Let me check this out. And he came over to where I was, and he very quickly made his way down and to the water's edge to look into the culvert. And I, at no point in my life from this point on until my dad passed, had I ever seen this man move this fast back out of there, tell me to grab, get in the truck, and we had to go find the nearest gas station to call the police. We ended up in the truck, and I remember the truck that my dad had. It was a black single cab Datsun pickup, and we went to the closest gas station to use their phone to call 911, and ended up they ended up telling him to call the sheriff's office and explain what was going on. And we waited there until a couple of deputies arrived in their patrol units and followed us back out to where we had found the body. Yeah, so I really don't remember how I felt initially. It was I guess it was, I'm 7. It was the curiosity had kind of set in. I was, running on adrenaline, I guess, because I had found something. I discovered something that no one else had. And I think that was my initial response. It wasn't, I wasn't scared. I wasn't sad or remorseful immediately. It was more of, there's this thing that we just discovered and now we have to tell people about it. I think that, having that initial, we found something discovery, and that kind of led my fascination into the darker art, darker, music, skulls, and I believe that this is where things changed. Before that, before this experience, I was, drawing race cars, and it was Nintendo and Ninja Turtles, and, things that a 7-year-old would be interested in, not skulls and not, darker comics and darker art, not at such an early age, but it's kind of where my mind went after that. That same year is the year that Tim Burton's Batman, the original Batman, came out, and we watched that in the theater. And having had this discovery and finding, the remains, and then watching Batman and Tim Burton, as dark as Tim Burton is, this really set things off for me as far as, what I'm into now, especially. And we can attribute probably a lot of that to this one experience. And, being interested in, darker art, darker comics, heavy metal, heavy music, louder music, all of those things that kind of fit together, probably made me a little weird at that age. This wasn't something that you would bring to show and tell to talk to the class or the teachers, and it just wasn't anything that I shared, going forward. I can count on both hands, over the last 30 years, how many people that I've probably told this to. Not many. And I feel like, I guess now is the time to tell this story, because it is kind of not necessarily a backstory, but part of a backstory into why I'm interested in darker art and tattoos and loud music and, all of the macabre. Those types of things probably were systemic from having this experience at such an early age. And, I don't feel like there was any PTSD or that this was a traumatic experience. It just kind of led me down a different path than most people at that age. And it's a story that I want to tell because it kind of sets the precedent of who I am now, and why I create art the way I create. And yeah, I just think that it's just an important story to kind of get out there so that maybe people understand me a little better. I don't fucking know. When we brought the police back to the scene, I can vividly remember everything that happened after there. The all of the elements that transpired after we got the police there. My dad brought them down. They investigated as they were. The next course of action was to winch this body and these remains out of the culvert, out of the creek. And at that point, I was forced to sit in the cab of the pickup in the truck. And my dad was like, do not turn your ass around. Like, do not turn around. Do not watch this, what's happening next. And my face is pressed against the back glass, fogging it up, wiping it off, watching them, winch this body, in various states of decomposition out of this creek. And it was gross. It was morbid. It was dark. But I watched every second of it. I was intrigued. I wanted to see what was going to happen next. I remember even to this day thinking, like, is it going to fall apart? Like, what's happening next? And yeah, that's probably where some of the morbid curiosity comes from, is having witnessed that, especially at 7 years old, going on 8. It's just not something every kid sees. It definitely pulled me into a world that definitely not every other kid my age was into, but it definitely pulled me into, understanding death at an early age. It led me to, I guess it humbled me early in that fact that, we had that discussion, we had that conversation about death, really early on, and it sparked interests in all kinds of weird, occult, dark, shit that just it is what I am. I like that shit now. I like dark art. I like skulls. I have a collection of skulls, not real human skulls, not yet, maybe one day, but metal and glass and ceramic, and I'm fascinated with it. I don't know many people at that time, at that age, that were into it, and it was a defining moment in my life for sure.